Recently, expectations have been raised that Star Fox is facing an imminent return with a new game. Whether or not this is actually true or misleading, and on this case I tend to find the concept quite believable, I like to stress test ideas by examining the logic that would lead to such an outcome. I've looked in a recent video about Star Fox's prospects in the coming years in the abstract, but if we now partner that with the assumption that a new Star Fox is indeed coming for 2026, what more might that tell us? Can we narrow down the list of likely developers? What might be Nintendo's strategy regarding other Star Fox titles? And what's the long-term approach at play here? First off, we know that Star Fox for a long while has been a significant Nintendo property, and yet it has struggled to gain traction over the years, with the Wii U's Star Fox Zero being especially poorly received in terms of both critical acclaim and sales. It's no longer even a title that Nintendo reference in their list of IP that they normally refer to with their investors, suggesting that at least in recent periods, it's not been one that they're actively trying to promote. In an IP era, bringing Star Fox back was always going to be a priority though, and while a remaster of one of the handful of past titles yet to return was always a possibility, from about 2020, when Nintendo was able to start seriously expanding due to the outsized success of the Switch in terms of its development capabilities, it was probably something that also fit what Nintendo was able to do. However, it also seems likely that as of 2021, when Takaya Imamura, a key Star Fox developer, left Nintendo, there probably wasn't a game actively in the works, although it's also possible that he was involved in prototyping titles that might have led to a new game now. All that said, it's interesting that Imamura talked in 2024 about having high hopes of a Star Fox movie, and while that was interpreted, and perhaps indeed was, just idle speculation, it's also completely possible that he was aware that this kind of concept was very much an objective of the current strategy at Nintendo, remembering that the original Illumination movie was well underway by 2021 when he left, and so presumably the strategies for future films were also locked in. The other question I addressed in my prior Star Fox video was who at Nintendo might helm a project such as this. In theory, there are any number of external studios who might be entrusted to bring back Star Fox, but with Star Fox veteran Giles Goddard launching his own Star Fox-like Wild Blue Skies this year, clearly those developers aren't going to be responsible for the new title, and indeed I speculated previously that their game may have originated as a Star Fox pitch to Nintendo that they then adapted to remove the obvious franchise elements, and this would track if Nintendo were accepting game pitches of this style back in 2021. Platinum Games has a fairly long history with Nintendo, and while Star Fox Zero, which they worked on, might not be the greatest line on their resume ever, given that they recently appeared to have had some turbulent times with the loss of key figures, a franchise entry from Nintendo might be a good way to go, even if only in a support studio capacity. I note that one of the planning team for Star Fox Zero from Platinum, Kazuhide Kawamura, is now at Monolith Soft, having worked on Tears of the Kingdom, so one wonders if Monolith Soft might be left-field candidates themselves to play a big role in the return of Star Fox, presumably through their Kyoto-based support studio branch rather than their core RPG group. All things considered, though, I think that while Nintendo are expanding, they would like to bring most of their key critical franchises in-house, as they did with Donkey Kong. Sure, Grezzo have the run of top-down Zelda at present, and Mercury Steam did very well with 2D Metroid, but in both cases there were very long-standing figures, Aonuma and Sakamoto, as well as many of their team, who were able to be right in the engine room steering the ship. In the case of Star Fox, though, it has been repeatedly farmed out to a range of different studios, and the outcomes have been patchy. Technically, Next Level Games, Nintendo Software Technology, or even Retro Studios would be internal studios, but building a team around Star Fox within Japan that can guarantee the integrity of the franchise going into the future is probably the best way to guarantee it has a positive long-term future, even if Nintendo rely heavily on support studios to grease the wheels of production, much as 8ing make up a very hefty part of the development muscle behind Pikmin 4, even though it is still developed by EPD10. Within Nintendo, my hunch was that the leading candidates were probably EPD9, the group behind Mario Kart games, and where the senior figure of Yasuyuki Oyagi wasn't credited on Mario Kart World in any major role. EPD9 frequently aimed to have two games in the launch window of new hardware such as Nintendogs and Mario Kart 7 on 3DS and Mario Kart 8 and ARMS on the Switch. We can reasonably rule out another ARMS game because so many of those developers were credited on Mario Kart World, and so I've speculated for some time that a second EPD9 game could be due to drop, and Oyagi does have a distant history with Star Fox as a course designer on the iconic Star Fox 64, and of course he has a history with EPD9. Given that EPD9 only released Mario Kart Tour, the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, and Mario Kart World since 2017, I think the timing very much favours them as developers if this is indeed an internal Nintendo project. They also have multiplayer credentials to bring back Star Fox into an online space, which can't hurt at all. All things considered then, I would expect that if there is an original Star Fox title in 2026, it'll be more likely than any other individual group by an EPD9 team, probably under the supervision of Oyagi. Now, to be fair, it's also possibly the case that it could be a completely new Nintendo team, not aligned with any previous group we've seen. We saw this in the case of Donkey Kong Bonanza, where EPD8 started the game off, but Kazuo Takahashi was brought into Nintendo in 2020 as the director, and essentially a whole new team was formed to bring that title to completion, even though it's still under the overall supervision of EPD8. Assembling a new Star Fox team within EPD9 might make quite a lot of sense in terms of guaranteeing the series' future. There's also the Dragon Drive precedent, where that title was notionally an EPD5 game, but evidently benefited from input from across Nintendo, including Kosuke Ibuki of ARMS and Mario Kart being credited. I've speculated for a long time that we will very soon, within the next 2 or 3 years, see a major reorganization of the departments within Nintendo, given the rate of expansion, the new building that is soon to be opened, the likely imminent retirement of EPD chief Shinya Takahashi, and the long history of mitotic studio expansion at Nintendo, where the whole of the current video game operation essentially was an outgrowth of Miyamoto's old R&D4 team back in the 80s. Therefore, it's difficult to say exactly how all these things will shake out, but my hope would be that we actually do get a semi-permanent group, and I think one is quite plausible. Another issue to consider is how Nintendo will promote the title. With Pikmin 4, there was a definite strategy, which was to build up the current game over several years with 2020's Pikmin 3 Deluxe and 2021's Pikmin Bloom, before going big with Pikmin 4 and the concurrent release of Pikmin 1 and Pikmin 2 for Switch. It's obviously not going to be possible to do the long-term build-up thing for Star Fox, and so the character is essentially coming from a standing start. A double dip of Assault and Adventures might therefore be good ways to replicate the Pikmin 1+2 effect, but releasing games like this is a harder sell now that GameCube has its own app on Nintendo Switch Online. Not impossible, witness Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, but while the Pokemon Company can do its own thing, Nintendo might not want to dilute the perception that Nintendo Switch Online is going to be the home to all the major titles on the GameCube in the fullness of time. Plus, while Nintendo had a long time to acclimatize people to Pikmin's return, especially through the app, if they're launching Star Fox essentially cold, then they probably want to focus on just the one title at once. Another key question then is what the long-term plan would be for the series. One of the key things that emerged from my prior deep dive on Star Fox was that Miyamoto himself pushed the idea of the games being innately challenging, but it also strikes me that releasing a game to slipstream the movie is really courting an audience that is far more casual, and so I would expect far more assistive modes and probably the incorporation of game share modes with the original Switch, given that it would be a good way to promote the game to new people. Given the dual screen antics at F-Zero as well, I'm kind of intrigued to see how far they might go with this and whether they could incorporate something similar using GameShare. At this point, given everything, I'd say it feels 90% likely that there will be a Star Fox release this year, even though, of course, we only have rumours to support it at the present time. Also, 90% I'd say we'll see some kind of ancillary Star Fox promotion, such as Nintendo Music Drops, Nintendo Today sharing concept art, or Nintendo Switch Online releases by the end of March 2027, something fairly significant but relatively minor to keep banging that drum. As for another title by the end of 2027, I'd put that at 30% likely, although obviously as time goes by, the chances only increase. And in terms of specific developers, the fact is that there are so many people who could be involved, but I would stick with my prior assertion that EPD9 are the most likely linked people at Nintendo themselves, although there are still many other options, but I would refer you to a previous video in which I've covered this in more depth if you're interested in this kind of thing. At any rate, I dare say more will emerge about all this in the near future, so until then, thank you for watching, thanks to the channel's Patreon supporters, and I look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.